Tonight, live from the Minskoff Theater on Broadway, the 1991 Tony Awards, hosted by the legendary star of Broadway's My Fair Lady and Camelot, Miss Julie Andrews, and by this year's Academy Award winner, a former Tony Award winner, Mr. Jeremy Irons.
Good evening. My heart skips a beat whenever I step out of the dark wings onto the bright stage of a theater, and I am thrilled to be here in New York. A few years back, I was a 19-year-old English girl whom nobody in America had ever heard of. I first appeared on Broadway in The Boyfriend, and it is a particular joy to be part of the theater's once-a-year Night of Nights, the annual Tony Awards celebration. And it is wonderful to have Jeremy Irons as my co-host tonight. Good evening, Jeremy.
Good evening, Julie. You know, the first musical I ever saw was you and Rex in My Fair Lady.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ted Kerr. I will be your Julie Andrews for today's A Time to Listen, a conversation project of the New York City AIDS Memorial. And it is my pleasure to welcome Sheldon Raymore and Donja R. Love. This conversation series is an opportunity for us to talk about AIDS culture and the impact that it has on us, the memories that it leaves inside of us, and also the clips of culture that maybe get missed along the way. I wanted to start with that episode of the Tonys because today's theme is performance. And I'm very interested in not what was heard on that clip, but what was seen and remained silent. As viewers may know, that clip marks the debut of the red ribbon that you saw on Jeremy Irons' lapel. The Visual AIDS Artist Caucus had come together to create the red ribbon, and using some insider information, smuggled it on to Jeremy Irons with the agreement that Jeremy Irons would say nothing about the red ribbon. And even though in the world of AIDS, we know that silence equals death, that was an example where silence equaled media attention. The next day, the Tonys and Jeremy Irons people were bombarded with questions about what was that red ribbon? And it launched, a visual way of activism that led to not only AIDS awareness, but of course, the pink ribbon for breast cancer, the yellow bracelet for many different other kinds of cancers. And it also sparked a lot of controversy. What is the role of art in activism? Can art ever save lives? The Tonys, of course, are just one important part of the world of theater and performance. By the night of the Tonys, HIV had already made its huge impact on the world of theater and performance in New York City. I'm thinking of the way that the house and ball community was impacted, but also made impact on the world of HIV. I'm thinking about downtown legends like Klaus Nomi, and then later Chloe Zabilo, and of course, Bryn Kelly. And I'm thinking of how the legacy of all that work is with us today, whether it's in the amazing work of Kia LaBeija or our two amazing guests tonight. Before we get into clips that tell us more about you two, let's just say, hey, how y'all doing?
Hey, hi, I'm Donja, and I'm good. I'm here, I'm breathing, I'm existing, and for me, that is victory. So I am in a good space, and I'm excited to be here and to dive in a chat and to get my life in the process.
Wonderful.
And I'm Sheldon. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite, and it's great to meet you two. So,
yeah, it's lovely. Let's start with a clip that will introduce us. Dave, do you want to play the first clip?
So I've worked in the field now for 5 years. What I do is I use preventative messaging through song and dance. So I do some sign language, sort of like voguing meets Native American Sign Language. So that's sort of the style that I do. But I also dance the women's dance styles. The messaging around HIV is really about destigmatizing it. I do a performance art. Her name is Prepohantis. She has a single on iTunes. I find that art has been an innovative way of getting folks to come together and sort of talk about these subject matters that they don't really want to sometimes, but it allows them a fun way to engage and sort of at least bring them in to open up those dialogues. This was actually a community project that we did. The tribe I come from, the traditional ways that we record kept was through winter counts, and each winter count represents a year and an event that happened in that year. And so it's how like a history book in a sense. So each of these pictorial images represent a year in time of HIV history. This talks about PrEP. But I use this one as a teaching tool because when you translate what that word means, it means to die of a venereal disease. It doesn't speak to anything about it being an autoimmune disease. And so I like to use that as a teaching tool, that as we develop these new words in our indigenous languages, that we're being trauma informed and not creating more.
That was a video about Sheldon Raymore, who is part of the Sioux Nation. He's a multidisciplinary performance artist, actor, choreographer, cultural consultant, costume designer, fashion designer, visual artist, and award-winning grass dancer. Sheldon starred in ABC's television series Born to Explore, Legend of Dance with Richard Weiss, where he was the featured grass dancer at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. Recently, Sheldon was awarded the 2019 First Peoples Fund Cultural Capital Fellowship. Hi, Sheldon. One of the things that I love about that clip is right at the end, it gets cut a little bit, but you talk about being trauma-informed. And I'm wondering if you can just unpack that a little bit for us, because I think that's a good way for us to think about how we want to proceed in this conversation.
Being aware of the language that we use and being cautious about language, and words can be very powerful and effective if they're used in the right way, but they can also be hurtful. And so really we want to use language that creates safe spaces for folks. And so part of that with being trauma informed is just keeping in mind to when we speak, to always think before we speak.
That is helpful. And being able to talk to each other through these platforms mean we also have that delay of technology. So that gives us that one more second to think about what we want to say before we say it. One thing that I really love about your performance and your work, though, too, is that it seems like imagery is also important to you. And we're going to see a clip in a few seconds of your performances, but I wonder, do you think about trauma-informed visuals as well?
It provokes thought and allows folks who are viewing it to come up with their own interpretations. And then, of course, there's the artist's interpretation. And so that's usually through the narration, the explanation of what sort of the inspiration came from the visuals. But trauma-informed, again, it's always best intentions, putting our one foot in front of the other. Best forward, best intent ahead. There's sometimes it's difficult when you're creating something brand new. It's not like you have a rule book, or something. So we're kind of, we'll stumble along the way and we'll learn as we go, but always maintaining a good heart and good mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. The first time I ever saw your work was Prepohantis, and for me, it was scandalous. I was like, I need to know more about this artist before I really feel comfortable indulging in the beauty that is Prepohantis. Before we see the clip, do you want to introduce her to us a bit?
Sure. It was in 2017. We developed ledger art, which in Lakota tradition, you'll see Prepahanis. It's the drawing of her. It's like an animated logo of her. And really the idea came from, wouldn't it be cool to see that image sing and dance and come to life? And so through these winter counts, that was one way of us storytelling, was sort of making things come to life and be able to bring that to wider audiences. Again, I think Prepahanis, just we used part of the name of an iconic figure, Pocahontas, but it was in no way or no means had anything to do with Pocahontas. I more so was developed Prepahanis as sort of the camp culture of drag, and so it comes from that. But also my two-spirit identity. I wanted to sort of honor that female spirit that I have within myself, and this was one way that I could express that was through Prepahanis. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's meet Prepahanis.
All over Turtle Island, Desert City life, this epidemic, time to survive. Having fun, you don't need to worry. Convention's fun. Monday, just take the pill. Tuesday, just take the
Yes. And you better go to iTunes to cop that single.
Oh, I love that we basically have a new guest. That was so amazing. So let's bring Donja into this conversation so we can all get talking. Let's start with a video where you talk about yourself a little bit, and then I'll read your bio, and then we'll watch a clip. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay.
My name is Donja R. Love, and I am the writer of the piece. This show, 1 and 2, came from a very personal place. If I can be honest, I was so tired of having HIV. I was approaching the 10th year of me being positive, and I thought I would be good. I thought I would be in a victorious space. So when I started to approach the 10th year, I was like, what is going on? Why do I feel this way? I was so depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. And so I grabbed my phone because I couldn't get out of bed to go to my desk and get my laptop. And on the notes section of my phone, I started to write this play to help me just navigate through everything I was feeling, what was going on. I did not want for anyone to know anything about this play. I just thought it was going to be a therapeutic piece. It was just going to live in the notes section of my phone. I looked at the play and I said, Donja, this play is not just for you. This play is for an entire community. The title of the play, it comes from a very sobering statistic. In 2016, the CDC released a study which says that 1 in every 2 Black, gay, or bisexual men will be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. So that's literally half. The response is always, I never knew that. People are so surprised. So I hope people will walk away feeling enlightened. I hope people will walk away feeling informed. And I also hope people will walk away feeling empowered to do something, to go into the world, to take up space that will activate change so that this statistic doesn't exist anymore. And people often talk about wanting to exist in a world that there is a cure. Yes, that's amazing. I would love to exist in that world as well. What I would really love to exist in is in a world that is stigma-free, right? Once we get to a place where stigma is eradicated, then we can get to a place where a cure will be easily possible.
I love that interview clip. Let me just read a little bit about you and then we can talk for a second. Donja R. Love is Black, queer, HIV positive, and thriving. A Philly native, his work examines the forced absurdity of life for those who identify as Black, queer, and HIV positive, a diverse intersection filled with eloquent stories that challenge the white supremacist heteronormative structures that exist in American culture. He's the co-founder of the Each Other Project, an organization that helps build community and provide visibility through art and advocacy for LGBT people and people of color. Plays include Soft, 1 and 2, the new group, Fireflies, Atlantic Theater Company, Sugar in Our Wounds, Manhattan Theater Club, and Lucille, Lortel, and Outer Critics Circle nominations, and The Trade. Please, hello, hi, thank you.
Hey, how are you?
How is it watching that? When did you record that interview?
I recorded that interview almost a year ago, so October of 2019. Yeah, so before the world got turned upside down, I recorded that.
And is there anything that you would say to that person, that year ago person now?
What would I say to that year ago person now? I would tell that person to continue to fight. I would tell that person, the Donja that recorded that, to also be really specific with your advocacy and with your activism, and how can your activism also be broadened to include and to hold more tangible space for Black trans women who are HIV positive as well, Black trans women who are incarcerated and who do not have easy access to, if access at all, to healthcare. So how can your activism and your advocacy also include that, and with whatever platforms you have, talk about that as well?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. You've had a big year. I got to see your amazing play 1 and 2, and we're going to watch a little clip. But do you want to just set up what the play is about before we see some actors?
Yeah, of course. I am always here for a little setup. So 1 and 2, as the clip that we heard, is about the last 10 years of me navigating being HIV positive. And so it's a semi-autobiographical play, and it chronicles the journey of a Black queer, newly diagnosed HIV positive man over the course of 10 years. And how does he navigate his status of being HIV positive in terms of depression, in terms of alcoholism, in terms of suicidal ideations. And we see it in a very absurd way, because being within multiple marginalized and oppressed identities can be absurd to just exist and to live. So we see it done in a very absurd way, where there's 3 actors and they play 15 characters that this protagonist meets: a doctor, a mom, boyfriend, all of these things. So that's 1 and 2 in a nutshell.
Perfect. Okay, Dave, are you? Please show us the clip.
Look, everything will be okay, okay? I mean, yes, your life will be a bit different, but overall it'll be the same. Nothing will really change. When I found out I had diabetes, I thought everything would be different, but it wasn't. I still eat cornbread, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, smothered chicken, pork chops, hog maws, ham hocks, yams, sweet potato pie, banana pudding, rice pudding, peach cobbler, blackberry cobbler, snickerdoodle cookies, pineapple upside down cake, and drink sweet tea to wash it all down. Okay? But this isn't diabetes. I have to tell my mom and my boyfriend, well, he's actually not my boyfriend anymore. I broke up with him because I thought it's somebody better out there for me, but me and him, he's not gonna want to do that anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing that clip with us. It's
Thank you.
such an amazing play. I got to be in the theater on December 1st, and there was a really amazing talk back that night too. So I got to feel the profound effect that the play is having on people.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was moderated by Kenyon Farrow, who's been on this program as well.
It was amazing.
Yeah. Before we get into talking about each other's work, what I would love to hear from you, and you decide who goes first, I would love to hear who are your influences? Who are the theater and the performance people that you are bringing with you into this conversation and that you bring into your work?
Oh, that's such an amazing question. You want to jump in, Sheldon? Okay. Who are some artists? Who are some folks that I bring into the space with me? I bring in, and I want to like open it up beyond a bit, if I may, just theater. Individuals who I bring into the space with me constantly are Marlon Riggs. I bring in Essex Hemphill. I bring Joseph Bean into the space with me. I bring Sylvester into the space with me quite often. James Baldwin into the space quite often. Lorraine Hansberry into the space with me. These are folks who, whenever I'm writing, and just whenever I'm existing, they are always in my mind and thinking of the work that they've done and the paths that they've laid that just light such a fire under me, where I feel like, oh, you can do anything, Donja. You can take over the world if you see fit, because you have such an amazing ancestral community.
Oh, I think you're muted, Sheldon.
Listening to a lot of spoken word artists, Native American spoken word artists, you know, like Buddy Redbow, John Trudell. I love the folk artist Buffy St. Marie. And then growing up, I was always traveling to the different powwows all over the country. And there was the Native American Dance Theater, and they used to tour the world. And, you know, I grew up watching them on television. So those are sort of my people that I grew up watching and sort of look up to and bring into the spaces, or I guess invoke some of their energies or ask for that. So.
Yeah, I love the words you both use, this idea of evoke and ancestors. And I just wanted to make space for it because they're with us, whether we name them or not. So just name them, eh? So I don't know your ages, but I will say that I am 41 years old. And I think I am part of a specific kind of generation of folks who learned about HIV through culture. Like, I learned about HIV through the nightly news, through watching Designing Women and the Golden Girls, and through having crushes on Madonna's backup singers and figuring out like which ones were gay, which ones were living with HIV, you know. And I'm just wondering, you know, for you two, how did you learn about HIV? Like, what were some of the ways that you understood the virus? Sheldon, do you want to go first this time?
Sure, if you want me to go first. So I definitely, you know, growing up, I predominantly grew up in the Bay Area of California. I was a first generation off the reservation child. My mother left the reservation and went to the cities. So we grew up in urban settings, and really HIV, it was not till my teenage years that I actually met one of the first HIV positive known women, Lisa Tiger. And I got to hear her story growing up, and it's really, you know, it really touched me. And then later I would go and to know people who became HIV positive. And so really that's sort of growing up was sort of just by knowing people, but also that was sort of my education about it, but also hearing Lisa's story.
Yeah. I'd say for me, similar to Sheldon, in my teenage years, I'm originally from Philadelphia, and back home in Philly, there's an amazing organization called Babashi, and I remember at the time, Babashi would do like skits and reenactments and go to like different schools and just encouraging, informing, making youth aware of HIV and AIDS. And at the time, I was too cool for school. So it seemed so corny, like, well, at least I get out of class to like experience this. But looking back at it in like retrospect, it was truly a profound and radical thing that they were doing, going into these inner city schools, teaching these young Black kids about sexual health advocacy. And I will say though, that was literally the only time at that young age that there was ever a conversation and I got language around HIV and AIDS. And it was to, if I can be honest, my detriment, because when I became HIV positive years later in 2008, that was the first time in which I really learned about HIV and AIDS and like the fullness and the like dynamics of it. Though I had that kind of introduction when I was a teenager, it wasn't until I myself became HIV positive where I fully had a larger understanding of what HIV and AIDS is, and how one lives and navigates with HIV and AIDS.
Sheldon, you're nodding your head. Is there stuff, does that ring true for you as well?
I definitely think, as you get, at least I agree. When I got older, I started learning more. And then when I worked for the American Indian Community House in New York City for their HIV program, I definitely learned a lot. And, a lot of the work that we were working in was, we were one of the first organizations in the Northeast that was serving Native American populations, folks living with HIV. So, I got to learn some of the history of the organization and the work that they did, but also I sort of came into the time of PrEP. So that was new medication that they wanted us to, sort of spread the word about. And so that's sort of, I learned more about it as I got older though.
Yeah, and it seems like you are now running with that. I would love to hear, like, what are some of the community reactions to Prepahantis?
Prepahantis, well, it's been mixed reviews. I think sometimes people have never heard of PrEP until they heard of Prepahantis, which has been an interesting thing with the Native folks I've heard up, like First Nations folks up in Canada. And then, but I've gotten a lot of support, from the Native Indigenous community. Some of the projects we've done, like the TP project and the winter count and Prepahantis, and Prepahantis is now a title holder for the National Native American AIDS Prevention Center, the awareness ambassador for 2 years. So it's my first time holding a title as Prepahantis. So I've been nothing but received love, embrace, and support. So it's been great.
Last year, you hosted for Stonewall 50, and Prepahantis made an appearance at the Two-Spirit and HIV conference in New York. And one of the things that I was really moved by in the audience was this idea of culturally specific HIV programming. And a lot of the conversations that I was fortunate to be a part of were talking about, like, what is life for First Nations people in the United States. And if we address that, then that's actually HIV prevention, or that is actually part of HIV treatment. And I wonder, is Prepahantis part of that impact? Like, does it matter that her name comes from Pocahontas?
I think people are able to look beyond it. I think there's a bigger picture at play here. And and there's a lot of moving parts to it, and there's a lot of people that have invested in it, and so it goes beyond just myself or just even Prepahantis. When you deal with community, we've worked with the Two-Spirit community, we've worked with national organizations, and spoke at a lot of different conferences. So there's a lot of people and involved with Prepahontas and the whole thing. It's a team of people, a team of folks, you know, and it's different art mediums. You've got music, visual art, performance art, community art projects. I mean, the list goes on, and you know, it's going to be interesting to see where we go in the next couple of years with it.
That idea of moving parts and lots of people involved makes me think about trust. And when I was seeing 1 and 2, I was like, oh, to be a playwright is an act of faith. You write these words and then you have to trust a director. You have to trust actor. Like, can you just talk to us about what's that experience of, I don't even know the right words, of providing a script and then walking alongside it?
Oh, baby, you hit the nail on the head. Trust. Okay, trust is it. And I'll say I've been, knock on wood, fortunate. I've been privileged. I've been blessed enough to work with directors who have been incredibly soft with me, who have been incredibly gracious and understanding of my text and the story and the vision that I have. And then it also comes from being like deeply rooted in who I am, right? And being able to advocate for oneself. I will say though, however, with 1 and 2, to date, it was the most challenging artistic experience that I've had. And it was the most challenging artistic experience that I've had just based on the material. Literally rehearsing for 4 weeks, a play with collaborators, actors, designers, a director that is essentially my life. So I'm sitting in a room where folks are doing the work that they're supposed to do, mind you, right? Doing the work of analyzing, of challenging, of questioning moments in my life. I'm like, oh no, this is exactly how it went down. I know what I'm doing. But then also like them having to find their way into the material as well, right? And then transitioning into a preview period where for more weeks, 3 weeks, I am now in a theater and I'm watching it with total strangers. I'm watching my life and moments, some of the darkest, most personal moments in my life being reenacted. I remember this might have been the first or maybe second week in the rehearsal process where we got to a scene in the play where there is a moment where the protagonist is contemplating and attempting suicide. And it is written the exact way that I attempted my suicide. And I thought beforehand, I set up multiple systems to offer safety for myself in the process. But we can talk about safety until the cows come home, but it's something completely different when you're in the space and you actually see a moment happening right in front of you. And I didn't go to rehearsal for a week after that. And it was incredibly traumatizing. It was incredibly triggering to be in that moment. But again, to go to your question and what was the process like, it was incredibly challenging. But at the same time, it was to date one of the most rewarding processes that I've had as a, because I was able to not just a community liberate and have folks see themselves reflected. I was also able to liberate myself as well, because I'm a firm believer that we have to have something at stake for ourselves if we're going to do anything. Yes, for the community is absolutely important, but we also need to have something at stake for ourselves, because why the hell are we doing it in the first place if we don't have a connection to it? So I was able to be liberated. My director for 1 and 2, the amazing Stevie Walker-Webb, said months before we even started the rehearsal process, which was, you have to think that the Donja right now is existing and is liberating the Donja that was just diagnosed. Right. And so as I navigated the rehearsal process, the preview process, I was always holding space for that Donja that was newly diagnosed and thinking that his world was over. So like that has always been helpful in the journey. And that was a part of the journey of 1 and 2 and turning over a play to these complete strangers at the time and saying, this is my life, do with it as you will.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that is very exciting about the work you both do is that for a long time, I felt like there was a silence around HIV. And when the silence was broken, I felt like it was very history, rooted in history. And then that history was really rooted in whiteness, in New Yorkness, in gay maleness. And one thing that I'm interested, and Sheldon, maybe you can take this while our friend joins us again in a second, is what did it mean for you to know that you were making culture for your community in a way that was important and first for your community and by your community?
I think what it really felt like was that, I think about when I got into doing this work, there was a lot of work that was already done before me, and I had to learn what was done before me. And so part of that was going, you don't know where you're going to get to in the future without learning where you've been in the past. And I felt it was so important to go back and sort of know the history of what happened, and then not only know that history, but how are we going to preserve that and pass that on to the next generation? How do these stories not get lost? And given that a lot of times, like I said, growing up, I listened to a lot of spoken word, a lot of storytellers. And, how do we pass that work on to the next generation? And so, doing it through art was a way of us, for us to preserve it and share those stories. And it also took really important collaborations. I had to meet with cultural consultants. I had to meet with language speakers, cultural advisors, a lot of folks. So it wasn't just something I did on my own. I definitely had to have mentorship in the process, and that was really important to make sure we did it the right way, I guess.
I love hearing that you did that research about what has happened before, and I wonder, is there any highlights that you want to share about what you learned about the work that came before you?
Just that, I was fortunate enough to get to work with some of the folks that were there in the early times of when AIDS came onto the scene, right? So they were there on the ground when there was no resources for the Native community out there, and they were really out there fighting for it and sort of making stuff happen. And so movers and shakers and activists and things. So I got to really, that really stood out to me, was just their persistence and how they had to advocate for us as Indigenous people to have a voice at the table, because oftentimes that voice gets left out, right? Or it's, you don't have a large enough population, so it's like we're less significant, given that we're 1% of the total United States population, right? So oftentimes we get overlooked. So it was just really important to have that voice at the table, and yeah.
Yeah. What about, before you wrote 1 and 2, what was, like, how do you wrestle with history as a playwright, as an activist, as an educator?
I often think about the erasure, similar to what Sheldon spoke of. I think about the erasure of my people, of my ancestors within the narrative, and how systems are at place, systems are at play where that erasure is okay, right? Where that erasure has existed, and if we do not speak up, if we do not resist, quite literally, that erasure will continue. And so how can I, as an artist, as a cultural worker, center, not just rewrite, but center me and center my community in the narrative, and like, what does that look like, and what does that mean? And again, what I was talking about earlier in terms of having something at stake, having yourself at stake in the work, I just often think about what is always at the core of my work is how can I liberate that younger Donye, right? How can I show up for that younger version of myself? Because I truly believe that we exist in a space where the younger version of me is here right now, watching me, right? And so how can I best advocate and show up for myself in that way where that Donye, not just the one that's talking right now, where that Donye sees himself reflected in the world, sees himself reflected in history, and what does that look like? And being totally transparent, how can I center myself? How can I center my people in a way that does not hold any space for whiteness? Because we've existed without whiteness, and we can exist without whiteness, right? As a queer person, how can I hold space that doesn't have to hold space for the heteronormative society, right? How can I eradicate the white gaze in my work? And how can I eradicate the straight gaze in my work? And is that possible? And the answer is yes, right? The answer is absolutely. We can get to this liberated space of being able to do that.
Yeah, that's what I really loved about 1 and 2 is that it felt like it was part of a tradition that was much stronger and larger than what we might consider white Broadway or something like that. And it was rooted in literal numbers and the literal statistics that are used sometimes to empower Black people, but often sometimes to not. And it was funny, when I saw the play, I thought you were pushing back against this statistic. I thought by having 3 actors, you were saying like, no, this 1 and 2 business is not for me. That is another way of counting us. I'm going to say 3 because you can't divide 3 and still get a whole person. And I thought that was so powerful. And I think this is also a question for Sheldon around statistics as well, because as you said, First Nations people and Aboriginal people are often lumped into other identity groups. So I would love to hear how each of you, who are clearly so aware of kind of the AIDS industrial complex, how do you deal with the often empowering but dehumanization that the kind of AIDS cultural production can push down on us?
I think just like I said before, is we're putting one foot in front of the other to make sure that there is visibility, that there is a voice at the table, combating that genocide, which is that erasure, and then that erasure of that voice and that presence. And so, it takes us to get out there and work with other people and sort of spread the message, spread the good word. And it just takes, opportunities like this, like we're doing right now, and to have these conversations is really important. So.
Absolutely. And I want to add to that. I know we both talked about this and the videos that were played, stigmatization, right? And that is such a heavy component within the history and the existence of HIV and AIDS, where stigma is causing so much violence to so many individuals. And what would a world look like where there is no stigma around HIV and AIDS? And how would folks be able to exist and be able to like navigate their status and just their existence overall? So I think it's also incredibly important when we talk about HIV and AIDS, knowing that there has to be a conversation around stigma, right? And how deeply rooted stigma is in our society, thinking that President Ronald Reagan didn't mention AIDS publicly until 1985. Years after so many individuals lost their lives, after so many folks were fighting, saying that I exist, who I am matters, right? My people, my community matters, right? And that was also a form of stigma that has just permeated our society. So how can we fight back, and what does that look like? So I think when we talk about the AIDS industrial complex, there also needs to be a conversation around how deeply rooted stigma is in our society as a whole and within our community as well.
I mean, that's interesting, that idea about Reagan, because also what does it mean when 35 years later, Trump promises to cure AIDS during his first State of the Union? Or what does it mean when he is talking about COVID-19 and he says that there's an AIDS vaccine? So I think maybe it's also interesting for us to say, like, what are the limits of visibility, right? Like, obviously Prepohantas and one and two are very powerful, and they have brought us together, and they will continue to bring people together. But do you often, as visual artists, as activists, as educators, do you ever think about, like, what are the limits of art and what are the limits of art?
I would say there's limits sometimes when we talk about data, like how can you quantify art when it comes to data? And I think that's something that that we run into. I think another thing that can be a limit sometimes is when you have to educate others. How do I say this in a way that, so they might not understand something, right? Like how is this a native narrative to data collection? You know, it might not fit within the constructs of what they want it to be. So then I guess that's limiting, right? Because then we're forced to sort of stay within those limitations, but it's so much more than that. So that's one of the things that I've run into anyways. Donja, what about you?
Yeah. I find myself, when you asked that question, I found myself thinking about a letter that Audre Lorde, Black feminist, lesbian scholar, she wrote a letter to the feminist and scholar Mary Daly. And in the letter, she talks about this essay that Mary Daly wrote. And in the essay, Mary is talking about feminism and talking about reverence for women and goddesses and things of that nature. And in the letter, Audre Lorde tells Mary that she notices a glaring omission of Black women. And so she talks about how she looks up to Mary. She looked up to Mary, and she wrote this letter wanting to call her in, wanting to hold space for her, a sister. And 4 months went by, and she never heard anything back. And she talks about how incredibly frustrating and tiresome and draining it is to be someone that exists within multiple intersections of oppression and having to hold space, having to fight, having to show yourself to other individuals who you think are fighting the same fight. And she had an epiphany where she realized, oh, that is not my job. I will no longer do that. And so I say that in context to thinking about the work that we do as artists, specifically for me as a Black, queer, HIV positive artist. I realize it is no longer my job to try to talk to individuals who also exist within oppressed and marginalized identity. If you do not see me, it is not my job to have you see me. My job is to make sure that I do everything in my power, again, to liberate myself first and foremost, and to liberate those folks who exist within my intersections as well. And if it just so happens in that liberation, you too are being liberated, because we know that when the most marginalized becomes free, then everyone becomes free, right? And so if I focus on that, and that's the most important thing to focus on, then everyone else will also achieve their liberation. I can no longer fight and prove my existence to anyone who is choosing not to, because now is a choice, who is choosing not to see it. So I think that is one of the most limiting things about the work that we do. And it's a very draining thing as well. And I'm choosing not to be drained by the nonsense anymore.
I mean, we can't not talk about Grace now.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need to talk about grace, because that is ever present in both of your works, but also in your answers, both grace for the self, but grace for the world. And one thing that we talked about over email first was we were going to talk about the role of alcoholism in 1 and 2, and the role of like, how do we deal? How do we cope? What does it mean? Like, when we are existing at intersections on the margin, life is rough.
Yeah.
And there's many ways we cope: art, friendship, alcohol, drugs, sex, podcasting. So I wonder if each of you want to just talk about the role that grace plays in your life, but also feel free to connect it to your work. Where is grace and how is grace in your work?
Let me go first.
Yeah, I'll let you jump in.
I think grace is what helps me keep balance in my life. I think I have to, always I need that. I think I need that in balance. I need that to, like I said earlier, have a good heart and a good mind, and try to live my life in that way. And, I do unto others as I'd like to be done unto me. I'm very much a person who believes in karma and stuff like that. So I always try to make sure, especially even in art spaces, like I think the energy is so super important, making sure that there's a good energy there, a good vibe, that people want to do this. It's not like I'm forcing them to do this, and again, like creating those safe spaces, because it should be fun, and it should be a place for us to feel whatever we need to feel. I love, Donja, that you have so much integrity in these pieces that you're doing. That is so important, I think, in art mediums, to bring that forth, that integrity of who you are, and let that shine through that art. So that's sort of how I keep grace in what I do.
Absolutely, come all the way through, and it literally is the same. And just being able to, when I think about Prepahanis, when I think about the work that you do, is how can we be able to, how do we combat, how do we challenge oppressive systems, and in a way that also has joy, right? Because for me, when I think about grace, I think about a complete space and state of joy, right? Of just complete surrender, of being able to just exist in the fullest version of myself. And when I think about joy, I think about joy just being what it is, and then also joy as resistance, right? Coming from a group of people who have historically been so marginalized, but yet we still find a way to exist and to smile and to be, right? So thinking about that, for me, is what grace looks like, where I could pop off at any minute, say, F you this, F you that, go off. But I am choosing grace, right? Because that's how beautiful the grace is inside of me. And that is how beautiful the grace is inside of you as well. So I often think about that. And that, I think, goes to what you were talking about, Sheldon, which is integrity. And at the end of the day, that's what I have. I have my integrity, right? I have the fullness of myself. I have my dignity. And how can I allow that to, as you keep saying, Sheldon, so beautifully, put one foot ahead of the other, to continue to get on this journey, to get to the fullest version of myself? Because that's, at the end of the day, what this is for me. How can I get to the highest version of myself, and what does that look like? And grace will get me there.
Beautiful. So last question. Either cite a specific example or use your imagination, but tell me and tell the world, what is a good performance? What is a good performance? You can get nasty. You can talk about what's a good performance in bed, or you can talk about what's a good performance on the stage, or you can talk about what's a good performance in front of the bank manager when you want a loan. Like, just tell me and tell the world, what is a good performance?
I think literally just that right now for me is a good performance. Like when it truly evokes something, right? That you didn't even expect to happen. That is a good ass performance. And then also, like, I know for me, when I'm experiencing a good performance, and it doesn't matter if it's like something that I see on stage, that I'm listening to, whatever the case may be, I know because of the medium, I don't think folks will like be able to see me. But like when I put on that that real stank face, that means I am feeling it, and that was a good ass performance. So I think that is a good performance to me.
I love Donja, and you can relate to this, I'm sure. When you're out there on stage, you know, you have sometimes tough crowds, and then you have those awesome crowds, and they're booing you on, and you're feeling that love, and that, you know, pushes you, and at the end of it, you're out of breath, you're tired, your stomach might hurt, but you just feel, you bled on stage, and you left it there, and that's a great performance.
Absolutely, like you left your mark.
Yes.
Come on through. Yes.
I also love how your answer, Sheldon, also works for in bed or in front of a bank manager. So beautiful. Come through. The one thing I know about performance is like leave the crowd wanting more. And I think we should wrap now. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Yes. So I just want to say thank you both so much for all of the work that you put in the world, and the work and how it will be into the future. That is a great gift you've given us. I also want to say thank you for joining us and making a time to listen with the New York City AIDS Memorial. AIDS history is our history, and it's also our future, and we proved that today. If you have anything that you want to share with us, email us at info@New York City AIDS Memorial. Follow us on all our social medias. And please share all this information with your friend. Share the arts, share love. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.